Welcome to the Parish the Thought Show. The opinions of Brian, your host, and his guests have not been sanitized or scientifically tested, so please consume at your own risk. Now, here's Brian.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, and whoever else is listening, welcome back to the program. My guest today is Valerie Hamaker, the host of the fabulous Latter-day Struggles podcast, which has just kind of blown up in the last couple of years. So welcome, Valerie. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Hi. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. Well, this is your story, so I'll try to get out of the way as much as possible. Will you just tell people kind of what you do and how you got here and kind of the backstory behind your show? And we're speaking to primarily Latter-day Saint Mormon audience. So this is rich, good stuff for them / us. So again, I'm going to get out of your way.
Well, thank you for giving me the floor and letting me sort of tell my story. I am from Centerville, Utah. So I think you said you're in Utah Valley. So I am very familiar with that area.
Yep.
Yeah. So born in Salt Lake, or Holiday, exactly. Raised in Salt Lake City, served a mission in the San Francisco. Actually, it was the Oakland mission at the time, in Oakland, San Francisco, California, Spanish speaking, which is where I met my husband, Nathan, who, if anybody's familiar with the Latter-day Struggles podcast, he is my co-host. And so he and I do this together, which is nice because it gives us something to talk about all of the time. And he and I have been doing this for about 3 years. And so you're right. It was sort of, I guess it was just more of a hobby, something that felt like the right thing to do a few years ago, but I was already really deeply involved in running a private practice. I was training graduate level interns at the time and really focused on other mental health related things when this emerged. And I don't know, it's sort of just something. Well, I think I feel like I better back up. Let me back up a little bit. I decided to get my master's degree in counseling when my youngest child was getting ready to go to kindergarten. I went and got my master's degree, started my private practice, which was primarily serving Latter-day Saints here in the Kansas City area. To my knowledge, there were no female mental health workers or Latter-day Saints. So that were sort of, what do they call it? The LDS preferred providers through LDS Family Services. And so right when I graduated, I immediately started seeing a Latter-day Saint audience. And at the time, I also received some advanced training in helping people who were struggling with issues around sexual compulsivity. I think at the time we were calling it pornography addiction. I'm aware that that's sort of evolved and definitions have changed and things like that. But it almost immediately filled up my private practice because I was interested in helping couples that were struggling with this issue. And I did a lot of public speaking in the state and in the region in this Kansas City metro area, where I met a lot of lovely people, and I was just really busy helping that client population. And it was very rewarding, but also very tiring. It's a population of couples in a lot of pain. And a lot of them have had a lot of very well-intended health care, I think is stretching it. The well-intended help from either ecclesiastical or even mental health workers that it didn't quite know exactly how to help someone struggling with this. And it just, the more I studied and the more I worked with them and the more I grew myself, the more I just became really, really interested in better understanding the intersection between spirituality, big picture, Latter-day Saint theology, trauma, mental health, sexuality, gender, power. All of these things became very, very interesting to me. And at the same time, I think I was growing enough to where it became more and more okay for me to be able to both value and cherish the parts of my identity that were really formed through my Latter-day Saint heritage tradition, but also to be able to critically look at some of the things that I thought were problematic. And as the years unfolded, not only did I find my voice, but I think I found a little bit more courage, and it felt really important to me that I use my gifts and I use my my deepening understanding to help the people in the most pain. And it started to occur to me that there was a population of people who were experiencing a great deal of pain because they both loved the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was deeply a part of their identities. It was a part of their family tradition and their heritage and their everyday lives. And also they were struggling because they were suffering through some dissonance and some trauma and some relationship issues. And they had questions and concerns and nowhere to take them. And if they took them to church or sometimes took them to a family member or a partner, what was already painful became even more painful because they were sort of told that there was something wrong with them. And the more I just started studying and like looking at what I was learning and looking at it sort of against my trauma training and my background and my understanding of human nature and the nature of God and all of those things, all of a sudden things just started sort of clicking into place. And I was like, I think I'm starting to understand what's going on here. And adjacent to that was a mentor who believed in me probably more than I believed in myself. And he said, I think you should be talking about this to more than just one or two people at a time. I think you could probably really help a lot of people if you had the courage to do this out loud, publicly. And it felt like the right thing to do, even though I was aware that if I spoke about some of these more complex topics, it could possibly bring with it some complications in my own life. But it felt right to me. It felt like the right thing to do. And so I proceeded and I started the Latter-day Struggles platform with a fellow therapist who, in retrospect, we realized that he was with me just long enough for me to sort of get the ball rolling. And then he sort of stepped back, not feeling like it was exactly where he thought he wanted his life to go. I think he recognized from the very beginning that there was a massive audience and this is going to soon, it was going to be a big deal. And he was further on in his career and sort of had a different path. And we recognize now in retrospect that it gave me the courage to do this in a way that I probably would not have done by myself. I wouldn't have probably started it on my own, but we got deep enough into it. And I realized that like I knew where this needed to go. And he stepped back and I panicked and thought, I can't do this. This is too scary. This is too big. The price is too high. But then I kind of went deep inside and decided, okay, is this the right thing to do? And once again, it always felt like this is something that needs to be done. And so I just dug in and I did it. And that's how the podcast began. And then Nathan stepped in a little bit later. He had done a couple of like collaborations with me and we realized, this is kind of fun. He does a great job co-hosting, and there's something fun, I think, about a married relationship that has the ability to sort of banter and have deep conversations in a respectful, loving, playful kind of way. And I think from there, it just sort of kind of things fell into place that way.
And he's literally your right-hand man. I mean, because he sits on the right. Unless your camera's flipped, he's sitting on the right side of you, right? He's
actually literally my right-hand man. And it's been kind of fun because I do have a lot of guests on the podcast as well. And we've sent surveys out to our audience, kind of like, what do you like the most? And I have some pretty cool scholars and theologians come on, and people really like that. But people really, really like the husband-wife dynamic. And I also think that I've noticed something I hadn't really thought about until I started getting feedback. I feel like in our church system, people that are on a faith journey and are sort of seeing some of the pain associated with gender dynamics and a patriarchy, I think they really like a partnership where the wife, the woman, is the host and the husband is the sidekick. And it's kind, I mean, in some ways I thought, oh, well, that's handy. That wasn't intentional, but that is how it's played out.
So, keep him in his place.
That's right. Yeah.
You mentioned some of the fears and concerns you had about starting this. What where does that come from? What was it? What was the fear about talking about these things more openly? What does that make sense?
Yeah,
my question.
It does. I mean, I think
let me back. Is it things you were feeling or things that you were hearing other people experiencing, or were you feeling the same things and just maybe didn't have words for it? I don't know.
I remember collaborating with this gentleman, this Brannon is his name, good friend of mine. He's been on the podcast many times. And when we sort of started talking about the potential of doing this podcast, I remember at first going, well, I think we can talk about spiritual and psychological development, but let's definitely make sure we're very like generic and vague and just like big tent. And I know why I was saying that, because I think at an unconscious level, I kind of knew that, like, if you talk about what is going on in the context of our church system, you're going to get in trouble. Like that's a no-no. Like we don't do that. And then I can remember thinking to myself, again, this sort of unfolded and I made better sense of it later on, but then I think we kind of, as we discussed it, it kind of occurred to at least me that, again, from like a psychologically healthy space, if I'm being authentic and respectful and offering a lot of grace, but also dealing with very real issues that I'm seeing on the ground from hundreds of hours of clinical work with people who both love the church and are legitimately struggling because of what they have internalized, even if it wasn't intended to hurt them. In my mind, I kind of thought to myself, I don't think it would be in my highest integrity to sort of let fear govern my decisions about this. And because I wanted to live in my integrity, and I also thought to myself, I thought this and I still think this. There is nothing in me that wants to harm this institution that has been a part of my development. It is because I care about my home faith that I want to speak about struggles that people have, whether it be about complexities connected to history or theology that is intended to be helpful, but is actually on the ground harmful. And to me, it's like my greatest gift I can give in the sustaining of this system is offering my thoughts and feelings about what people experience when they try their hardest to do exactly what they're told. And it does not lead them to God. It doesn't lend itself to thriving, which I believe is what God wants of each of their children. And so from my perspective, as much as it seems sort of, counterintuitive maybe, I am giving my professional time and energy to something that I care deeply about because I want it to thrive. And I also, it doesn't take much to sort of see in the here and now, there is a crisis of faith going on, not just in the Latter-day Saint tradition, but throughout Christian traditions worldwide. And to the extent that we care about our traditions, we need to talk about them and look at what it is that is making people go away. And if we care about something, we don't want it to go away. We want it to become healthy. And the other thing I think I realized, Brian, is that from a mental health perspective, to me, the healthiest thing we can do when something is hurting or when there's suffering or when there's misunderstanding is we talk about it. We discuss it. we wrestle with it. We allow something to be messy because life and marriage and relationship and family and systems of people, they're messy. They're allowed to be messy. That's how it is. And so it's like, it's okay if we've got some theology that needs to be sort of looked at. And if we have people that have professional expertise that can say, hey, there are some real problems with this thing. It hurts people when we talk about it, a certain subject this way. It brings up shame. It brings up scrupulosity. It brings people that struggle with this particular teaching. When taught this way, they become depressed. It actually can cause mental health issues. Like if I'm doing this, it's actually because I'm committed to the health of the system. From my perspective, it's the most loyal and loving thing one can do, as opposed to pretending like it's not there or diminishing its reality. And then, sort of just lamenting that something fails when it's like, hey, we have data here. We have intel. Let's talk about it so that people can recognize that there's not something fundamentally wrong with them. But we can also just say, hey, we're doing our best and we're trying our hardest to be inspired, to be inspiring. And sometimes we get it wrong, and that's okay. Let's talk about it and let's help ourselves, our families, and our church flourish. And that's really where my heart is. And so to me, it was like, well, if they don't receive that well from the perspective of leadership, I'm going to try to explain myself. That was sort of my leading attempt, right? And I stood by that. Like, it's like, I'll just help them understand. I think I was probably a little naive from the gate, thinking that like, I'll just sit them down and it'll be fine, because they'll understand like the intent of my heart. And from there, it'll be fine. And that's sort of where I guess it got a little bit more complicated, because I probably didn't anticipate the fear that would accompany someone like me doing something that isn't done very often, from even my stance of like a lot of respect and a wish to do well by not only the people that I serve, but actually the church too. I think I was kind of an unknown quantity, and they didn't really know what to do with me.
How long have you been a therapist or been dealing with like LDS couples?
I started my second graduate degree in 2013. And so seeing people clinically a little over 10 years, not too long, but, thousands of hours at this point. Yeah.
Were you surprised by the things you were learning about that people were struggling with? Or maybe were you dealing with some similar things in your own life but didn't really know how to identify it until you started hearing other people's stories?
I think that for me, it was sort of like a slowly unfolding process, meaning that I think as a clinician, you hear something and you have to kind of hear it repeated over and over again before you start making connections that like, I'm hearing this over and over again. Like what's the common thread that runs through all of this? And so for me, I think it took me many years. I had actually had to sort of like dig deeply into like the concept, say, for example, of patriarchy, and look at things. I had to be exposed to feminist theory before I started seeing it everywhere. And all of a sudden it was like, oh my goodness, like this isn't a one-off. And what's going on here is these couples, for example, are coming in with, they've got some idiosyncratic issues, but there's something that's like driving all of this. That is a common thread that you can kind of weave throughout larger, like many, many presentations in many ways. And people don't recognize that they are actually part of a larger system that has socialized them. And it isn't just these two individual people. It's like, oh my goodness, the way their brains were formed, the way they see and map themselves and their partner and their families and the world is a part of this larger invisible system that is really impacting them in a way that they can't understand. And so that kind of thing, I didn't see it for many years, actually. And I think I did a good job being a therapist, taking, each couple and looking at their situations. But I think once I started actually looking at all of the various layers that sort of inform some of the pathology and some of the pain and suffering, it sort of helped inform me on how I could help them as a couple with their individual idiosyncratic things, their traumas and things like that, which I already had training on. And then I could sort of like integrate in also more specific things connected to how they had been raised, connected to this faith tradition. And then also I feel like it's gracious and helpful for people to recognize that like some of these issues really are, you could call them like Mormon specific, but most of them really aren't. A lot of these are more early stage faith specific. In other words, out here in the Midwest, I've worked with, people that are lots and lots of evangelical people and Catholic people and things like that. And their issues actually in individual work and in couples work are quite similar just based on where they are in their stage of psychological development. And then you sort of overlay that with like, okay, what is their faith system? Like how has that sort of complemented or reinforced some of the things that they're struggling with? And so I feel like I do a better job with the Latter-day Saint faith because I'm deeply in the, having been born and raised and very faithful, and I've served a mission. I'm married in the temple. I've gone through all of those passes, and furthermore, I was very Orthodox for the vast majority of my life. My faith transition to being more nuanced and having a sort of a broader universalist understanding of spirituality is rather recent, which sometimes I regret, but actually I'm recognizing how productive that has been because I am very, very keyed into the way someone feels and thinks and processes reality from that vantage point, because that was how my brain was formed. And so I understand why people struggle the way that they do in ways that I see differently, but I get it. I can see both sides fairly clearly just because I was there for so long.
Okay. Will you share with the audience what's happened in recent months? It's probably been a couple of months right now tell me you've sort of become a target for local leadership. So can you walk us through that? And it sounds like you're doing so many things right, trying to help people stick it out, understand it, wrap their brain around the cognitive dissonance that I've been in for 30 years and never really paid attention to anything. I just did the things up until about 3 or 4 years ago. And once you start seeing things, you can't unsee them and you want to fix them. You're like, yeah, this has to be better. We got to do this better. And I don't think the system was ever designed specifically to destroy people, but it's kind of evolved into kind of a monster that needs some taming, I think. So can you dive into that for us?
So I started this podcast about just a tiny bit more than 3 years ago. And for the first 18 months or so, we didn't get any feedback from any of our local leadership. And I don't know, I kind of just was going to write it out and hope that because I had really strategically privileged, it was important to me that I take whatever I talked about, I did so from a place of a lot of respect. And I don't feel like I had to be very strategic from the perspective of being respectful and never, I'm not somebody that's going to go on a podcast and assassinate somebody's character. I don't do that ever. So it's not like I was going to start doing that on a public platform. That's just not my nature. And also the more I read and the more I understood, and actually through my clinical work, I've come to realize that there aren't any bad people. There just aren't. People are wounded. And when you sit down and listen to somebody and understand the nature of their suffering, everything is logical from the perspective of their psyche. That's why we talk about something being psychological. Something, when you start really listening and you get curious about somebody, the way they interpret the world makes sense based on their lens and their suffering and their perspective. And so it doesn't take a lot of effort for me to really truly believe that the people in charge in this institution are good people who mean well and also have their own human wounds and blind spots and are products of their own times and experiences and cultures and are deeply steeped in loyalty and tradition. And I get that. Makes perfect sense to me. So while on the one hand, I can show a ton of grace for their goodness, their like innate goodness, which I believe all of us have, I also have always felt to be candid about theology and the ways that the theology impacts the mental and spiritual well-being of the people with whom I have worked. And therefore, because I have talked about these things and been very open about certain doctrine, theology, policies that harm the infinitely good souls of my own brothers and sisters and families and like the people that I love, I drew the attention, at least of my local leadership, and they started becoming curious and asking questions and calling myself and my husband in, and which just sort of led us down a path of some conversations, which I was actually, I wouldn't have pursued them because as far as I was concerned, as long as they were, not calling me in, I was more than happy to just continue to do my work because as far as I was concerned, this is my profession. I don't do this on church property. I don't get up in sacrament meeting and, talk about, my professional, platform or anything like that. And so I was doing my thing on my time and started running a whole bunch of support groups, all of which have been extraordinarily spiritual, beautiful, healing places for most people that come through them. And it just, I ran into some struggles with ward and stake leaders, mostly because we were having a hard time meeting one another because what I'm doing is complex, and the suffering and the experience of people that are in a faith crisis, it's messy and it's painful and it's oriented around a lot of, I think it's fair to say, some pretty psychologically intense and in-depth struggles. And I think it's important also to note that the people that come to the Latter-day Struggles platform they were the most orthodox, the most devout, the most committed, the most all in. And they were in the most pain because when this faith crisis hits, they're devastated. Their whole world is falling apart. And it does, in fact, cause extreme mental health issues and a lot of distress. And because their identity is so crafted around who they are as members of the church, when they start confronting doubt and struggles and inconsistencies and cognitive dissonance, they don't know where to go and to whom to speak. And they are also told when they try this, they're told that there's something wrong with them. And there's a narrative in the church around somebody who's in this space that it's not very flattering to them, and it's not very kind, and it's not true. And so what I would try to explain to my priesthood leaders was, I am on your team. I am serving a unique demographic of this church tradition, and the people that I serve, they're listening to me not because they want to throw the whole thing away. They're listening to me because they want to make sense of a lot of suffering that they're experiencing in the face of something that matters deeply to them. And what I would try to explain was so uncomfortable to them because I'm allowing complicated things to be complicated. And honestly, God bless these men. I mean, they don't, I didn't work with a single one who had a mental health background. And so in some ways, I wouldn't expect them to understand what I was working with and the complexities of what happens when someone is bumping into a doctrine or a policy that is causing them extreme mental health issues. And so some of them would kind of just like, I need you to just they need to follow the prophet, or they need to be on the covenant path, or something that was very sort of, it would take something that was really complicated and it would sort of attempt to make it very, very simplistic. And the more I talked to these gentlemen, the more I feel like I was able to start like, hold on, I understand that. And also let me tell you what is going on the ground. And we just were running into this impasse, which was what I was explaining was getting, I think, was sort of over their heads. And it was confusing and probably distressing to them because I was, in some cases, introducing very real issues that I think they could, at least in my presence, acknowledge this is a problem. And I can understand why you're doing what you're doing. And so when we kind of made it to that space and they could at least acknowledge that like what I was doing was in fact helpful to people, then the conversation sort of evolved into, that's fine. Do what you need to do to help these people in private, but don't say these things in public, which to me was extremely distressing and a big red flag, that I am being invited and encouraged to help people become psychologically and spiritually healthy in private, but in public, I need to change my stance and essentially say something that is outside of my integrity and that is harmful to people potentially. And I'm not saying like across the board, everything is harmful. That's the last thing that I don't believe that to be true. And I said, and I still concur, and I will say again, I will encourage any human being to follow any leader, prophet or otherwise, who invites them to live a life that brings them closer to God and that is resonant with who they are as a child of God. But I will not encourage anybody to do any following of anyone, prophet or otherwise, if it is harmful or if I can tell or they can tell that what they're being invited to do hurts them and diminishes their ability.
Or doesn't make sense.
Or if it doesn't make sense. And so, and I kind of like directly said that to these gentlemen. And anyways, it was just really painful and challenging and frustrating and discouraging that what I was doing, I was becoming more and more convinced was the right thing to do. And I think it was just so, it frightened them. They were afraid of what this meant because I think it made what they wanted and hoped would be quite simple and simplistic. It was kind of requiring them to confront that, like, this isn't simple and simplistic. It's much harder than that. And I'm trying to help a lot of people, and I am helping a lot of people. And incidentally, I said this for their sake, because I knew this was what mattered to them, is a lot of people are also staying in the church, which is true. The problem with that even was that was hard for them to hear, because I think that they're acknowledging that would actually cause them to have to retroactively acknowledge that if I'm helping people in this way, then they're acknowledging that there's a problem in the first place. And I couldn't get most of them to even get, to even go that far.
Do you think that stems from, I think, just the culture of this is perfect, this is God's one true church, which we say all the time. How could it not work for everybody? I mean, from the time those men those leaders of yours who may or may not be your age or older, that's all they've been fed their whole life as well. Do you think that stems from just the air we breathe in this culture?
I think what's going on there, and I'm sure there are a lot of things going on, but one thing that did occur to me as I was having these candid conversations with these gentlemen is that, well, and this came to me actually in a really beautiful healing moment that I had with a gentleman who was a former bishop of mine, actually, and a good friend of mine. And my husband and I sat down with him and kind of explained like what we're going through and what's happening. And to his credit, he said something that was profound and it's really stayed with me and taught me, like, okay, I think this is why we're struggling so much. He said something like, I don't sit with people all day, every day and hear on the ground, hour after hour, the things that you hear. and essentially, I don't know that he said these exact words, but what I heard was, I have the luxury of having a profession that's so far removed from this that I can quite easily sort of take these teachings and this theology and believe it to be, just fine, and sort of, it works for everyone. But how can I know what is really going on? Because I don't really hear all of the things that you hear. And he also said, and during the time that I served, I did start to hear enough to recognize that this is complicated. And so I don't want to impose on, like, what you're doing, I believe, is important. And these stories are real, and these struggles are real. And kind of what he was saying is like, I need to stay out of my lane. Or I need to stay in my lane. We said, I need to stay in my lane and get out of, your lane. And by the time that conversation ended, what we heard was, keep doing what you're doing. It's clearly important. And so this is somebody who had, whose experience and whose life had invited him into some degree of complexity in ways that I think some very earnest, diligent priesthood leaders don't have. And I don't mean that in a way, like in a disrespectful way, because I don't think there's any sort of value attached to their worth or their goodness based on where they are in their levels of like psychological and spiritual development. But I do think there is a tendency sometimes to promote the most obedient, the most rigid, and sometimes the most conventionally believing men to these positions of ever increasing power, which means that the ones that are the least likely to see nuance and see complexity are the ones that are actually holding more and more positions of power. And I do think also that in early stage faith systems, rigidity and sort of holding on to one's black and white stance is considered actually the most faithful position of all, as opposed to paradoxically the opposite being true, which is, I think that, stages of faith, the theories around stages of faith teaches us that the ability to actually be complex thinking and to allow oneself to be curious and not knowing, and to listen to the stories of other people in order to sort of allow ourselves to always be learning more and more and more, like that right there. That's maturity. That's psychological health. But when you have someone in a position of leadership that believes that my holding fast to this one way of thinking, to the extent that I don't even have I don't need to hear your story because the decision has been made. We have the theology. It's right. It's true. It's unchanging. Therefore, there's no need to have a conversation like that in and of itself is in some ways, sometimes I think reinforced. And so what you have is sort of reality, the reality of people suffering and struggling, bumping into these dogmas and these policies and doctrines that are, they don't represent the reality of people's real experiences. And so when people have these conversations, they end up kind of just giving up and going away. I mean, one of the gentlemen that we spoke with mentioned at one point in time that, like, I've talked to people who have struggled with faith crisis, and the conversations are so successful. I just see them once, and they're solved. And I'm like, I think you're seeing them once because they try to explain what they're experiencing and run into such a brick wall that they realize that I am not in a safe space, and this gentleman may be trying, but he doesn't get it. And so they leave because they are astutely acknowledging that this is a mismatch, and that my suffering is not being acknowledged. And I think that's the degree of the disconnect, that it's like, it's so simple. I just tell them to read their scriptures and say their prayers, and they off they go, and they're fine. So yeah, I do think there's a sort of a rigidity, and back to your original question, which is, I think the phenomenon of sort of talking about the one true church is highly problematic because it makes accountability and growth and the normalcy of human error. It makes all of these things that like need to be in place for humans to be able to evolve and grow as well as systems. It almost like forecloses the ability for systems to do the very thing that needs to be done, which is update itself with new information. And so when one says this is it, it makes it very, very challenging for it to be like responsive, which is very ironic because we call ourselves a living church. We talk about restoration and we talk about, like ongoing revelation. And it's like, yeah, I give all of those, 5 stars. And yet at the same time, on the ground, when you have living human beings offering information and offering the potential for revelation to unfold and for restoration to be happening, because they're saying these doctrines, this theology is harmful, we don't actually integrate what's built into our core theology.
Maybe we ought to redefine what those things mean when we say ongoing revelation or continuing or living, growing. Maybe their definition is different than the rest, of us.
I think it must be, because ongoing revelation to me means that revelation comes in the form of human beings saying, this teaching brings me closer to God. Wonderful. Hold on to that one. Expand that one. This one over here doesn't. And so frequently, what I've noticed, just looking at sort of the psychology and history, is that most of the theology that is the most harmful is just what we have adopted through our faith system as a product of the larger culture. And as the larger culture becomes more enlightened and wiser, certain ways of thinking and believing and practicing fall away because we as a culture are awakening in ways like connected to sort of like, say, gender and sexuality is a great example. Our larger culture was blind to many issues that were harming the culture at large. And in some ways, I think it was just, things weren't challenged. And as we awaken, things become challenged, and the healthier systems pause and take feedback and go, gosh, that was bad. Like, whoa, we did not see that. And now we do. Let's update things. And to the degree that a system can be open and responsive and curious and accountable, they just make changes, and the people in the systems are grateful that their feedback is appreciated, and they don't go away or like respect them less. They actually respect them more because they feel like they're a collaborator in creating a system that contributes to the greater good of everyone.
Well, maybe talk about where things are with you and your husband. And I know you had, your story, and we can point to different podcasts where you talked about your story as well. But like, where are things now with your leadership and your membership, and, how's that unfolded? And because that's pretty intense.
Yeah. So starting, I think I mentioned, we've been doing this podcast for 3 years. About 18 months ago, we started having sort of these conversations and
came on the radar.
Yeah, right. We came on the radar, and, I think at first there was a lot of anxiety connected to that. And then I really actually decided to lean in, because it occurred to me through my own personal work that in the beginning I was responding as if I was guilty of something. I was sort of my more traditionally believing earlier stage faith self was responding as if I was in fact all of the, things that I think I was, worried they were accusing me of. Right. And then it kind of occurred to me that, like, wait a minute, I am not doing anything wrong. As a matter of fact, I'm doing something incredibly important. The hundreds of letters of feedback. We hit 7 figures on my podcast. We were getting feedback that human beings were finding healing, and they were finding God, and they were healing relationships. And they were even reconciling the good and the true and the beautiful about the LDS Church that they could not see when they were in the worst of their crisis. the relationship with the church was changing and it was never going to be the same. But in some ways, people were able to say, okay, this has been an important part of my life. It's a part of who I am. I can own and appreciate this part of my spiritual development, and I can take what I've learned and I can become a spiritual self on my own terms. And so I'm getting more and more confident and kind of like, I'm going to keep doing this. And this whole process was helping me differentiate more and more from my identity as needing to accommodate what the leaders needed me to do or thought I needed to do. And Nathan and I maintained that we wanted to have a collaborative relationship with the church. We tried that. And the more confident I got, the more I actually started like pursuing conversations with them if I could. As a matter of fact, we started to actually want to talk to people. At first, I mean, I would have never dreamt of like, I want to talk to an Area Authority 70. As a matter of fact, it was offered to us early on. And I was like, that's the scary. I didn't want that because I thought, no, I don't want to be on, the radar of, people higher up the hierarchy. And as everything unfolded, I was actually pursuing conversations with an Area Authority 70, trying to connect with a 70. I was realizing, Brian, that I am uniquely able to help these gentlemen if they want to hear what I have to say. I want to help them see that there is a demographic in the church that is suffering, that wants to stay connected to the church. But in so doing, we have to have some challenging conversations, and I'm willing to have them. You serve your demographic, which is a different demographic, and I'm sure they're doing a lovely job. They're in a different stage of their spiritual growth, and I'm serving a demographic over here. So can we both just respect one another's areas of expertise, I guess you could say. And so as I was doing this, part of the reason why I felt motivated to do this is because it became very clear at some point in time that Nathan and I were under the stewardship of a stake president who simply wasn't willing, able, or wanting to dialogue with us and did not understand on any level what I was trying to do and what we were accomplishing, notwithstanding multiple testimonials of the good that we were doing and a lot of attempts to really help him. And so it occurred to us that, like, if we're going to preserve our membership and maintain what I was worried would be, I didn't know what the social equity would look like. I didn't know, let me say that differently. I was concerned that if, worse came to worse, people would no longer trust me. And that was important to me because I want to be able to help as many people as possible. And so my membership felt to me perhaps potentially like a way for, I was worried that if I didn't have membership in the church, I would lose the trust of some people, certainly on the early faith journey. And so it felt like it was worth my trouble to try to collaborate with my priesthood leaders. Although I will confess that there was nothing in me that felt like losing my membership was in any way, shape, or form impacting my, my standing before God or anything like that. I, by this point in time, had come to realize that God spreads goodness and truth amongst all of their children, and that this particular, part of God's garden, to use that narrative, is very important to them. But we're not the only ones. We don't matter more. We don't have more truth, but we participate in truth as it is unfolding throughout time and throughout the world. And so I wasn't worried about my eternal exaltation. I wasn't worried about any of that. Not at all. As a matter of fact, if anything, I was feeling very, very bonded to and connected to God through my work. And so allowing this to unfold and pursuing conversation and collaboration led to an invitation to a membership council, which would have only been, if it had happened like 3 weeks ago, pretty recent. And when this happened, Nathan and I were kind of that sort of surprised, but not surprised at all sort of thing. Like, oh, wow, this is happening. We'd already decided a long time ago that we would not participate in a membership council for a variety of reasons. One of which was that we didn't want to dignify a process that we felt was exploitative, because there was no due process connected to what we were experiencing. And we had nothing new to add to what we were what we'd already felt like we'd done as much as we could to explain who we were and what we were trying to do, and that we were trying to help the church. And we were actually very instrumental in helping thousands of people in the church. And the other thing too that I realized after the fact is that oftentimes I think a membership council is held in situations where, say, for example, if somebody has done someone else harm, maybe they've been unfaithful to a partner or something like that, and maybe there is some value in coming forward and being accountable that I have done harm and I'm sorry to the person that I've harmed or something like that. I'm not convinced that's an appropriate setting to do that anyways, but I can see some value perhaps in something that makes a repair. And Nathan and I hadn't done anything wrong from our perspective. We were actually acting in our deepest integrity. What we had done wrong, if anything was, if something was wrong, is that we had chosen to transgress we had chosen to speak up in a system that silenced integrity of this nature. And that wasn't a condemnation against us. It was actually against the system. We had broken a rule that the system had put in place to silence people who are trying to speak up in ways that are important. And so, yes, we did that. But that is very different than someone who has transgressed and harmed one of God's children. We were actually doing what we were doing because we love God's children.
Yeah, because you were exposing a flaw that was hurting people.
Yes.
You weren't coming up with anything new.
No.
Just saying, hey, this is what's happening. We should be better.
Yes. And I don't think they wanted us to expose the flaw, because I think from where they were, they didn't want to acknowledge that there was a flaw, even though I think some of them could acknowledge that there was, but they didn't want us to do it publicly, because then we had to circle back to follow the prophet. And so it did become quite complicated, because I wasn't willing to conform to their expectations, because I didn't feel like that was in my highest integrity.
Didn't you say in one interview I heard you on that they said, you don't need to solve this. We've got this solved. Was that you that said that? I've been listening to a lot of shows or something to that effect. Like,
yes,
we've got this taken care of. We don't need you.
Correct. I believe that was something that was said to my husband in a meeting that I wasn't in attendance, but where I wasn't in attendance, but yes, kind of the, like, you're getting in front of the prophet.
In front of the prophet.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, I get that. And yet at the same time, this is where I think there's a sort of a fundamental problem, which is that when you're looking at mental health issues, you need somebody who has spent time and has given and committed their lives to learning about mental health issues to deal with mental health issues. And so these gentlemen, clear up to the top, they're not mental health workers. They don't see the impact that patriarchy has on the development of the male or the female mind. They don't necessarily see what happens to the self-esteem or the mental health of an LGBTQ plus person who has been told through the theology that there's something fundamentally wrong with them, or that they're not that they shouldn't participate in pair bonding, which is a fundamental part of what it means to be human and to grow and develop as a human being. And so, with all due respect, this matters. Somebody's ability and training and background in areas that are connected with growth and development and mental health and trauma recovery and how, the arc of like human growth and development, those things actually really do matter when you look at how does a spiritual system either contribute to or diminish one's ability to thrive as a human being. And so in some ways, and I say this with respect, if you're not a mental health worker, you don't have the skill set to know how to manage people that are in suffering around certain issues. And if someone sees this and says this theology harms God's children, I think that the most integrity-based thing that someone can do is to actually say that out loud, because I think what we all agree on is that all of us want God's children to thrive. And so if I have intel and I want to help and I am helping, to me, I guess it's just kind of sad that they don't want that help. And I think that to some degree that speaks to fear and perhaps a little bit of, like the inability or the I don't want to hear what you have to say, because then that would have to, that leads us down the path of, the reality that maybe we aren't perfect and this is not fully inspired all of the time, which again, I don't have a problem with it. I don't think most people would. I think they would be grateful for the accountability and the willingness to say, let's hand this to a mental health worker. I've loved bishops and stake presidents in the past who have done that. They're like, I'm not that. Hand it to somebody who is. And so that was an accusation. And it's one of those things where I understood their perspective, but I also kind of had to just sort of say, well, we've got to, I think that's a systemic issue, which is that mental health workers ought to be dealing with mental health issues. And in healthy systems, those who don't have that background just collaborate with the mental health workers, and together we work on how can we in fact help God's children thrive, and how can we help this church system evolve so that it is maximizing its potential to bring about thriving and growth and development and, happiness inside of, oneself and within relationship. And so anyways, we went ahead and withdrew our membership because we didn't feel like excommunication was relevant. We didn't feel like it was psychologically healthy. I didn't see any need to stand before, what would it have been, 15 or 16 men to sort of explain myself. They're not mental health workers. This is inside of my profession, and they don't have this training and they don't have stewardship over me from that perspective. And so we didn't want to reinforce the idea that we actually bought into this process because we didn't think it was appropriate in the first place.
And it could have been a decision that was already made, which I've heard is a common thing when it's not a fair playing field either. Do you think, let's maybe talk about the possible elephant in the living room, that because you being a professional female telling these brothers what to do, that, hey guys, I am an expert, you are not, to be the playground mentality, I know more than you do on this and you're wrong kind of thing. Do you think there's a little bit of that, or am I reaching too far?
I think it would be fair to say that probably was a component to the larger picture. I think if I were to be fair, some of the gentlemen with whom I spoke, I did not feel an energy of sort of patriarchal threat. I felt more of an energy of fear connected to loyalty and fear connected to the rhetoric that had been very deeply, seemingly internalized within them, that it doesn't matter what this other person has to say. If they're not following the prophet, the conversation's over. Like, there's nothing that she can possibly say that can matter, because one cannot not follow the prophet. So in some ways, those conversations were over before they began, even if I didn't feel an energy of sort of like hierarchical, patriarchal threat. Now, on the other hand, there were some dialogues that I had that I felt very much as if, what are you doing? Who do you think you are? How dare you? Kind of energy. And the thing that's ironic about that is that these are conversations that I wouldn't have engaged in, because I would have stayed in my own lane and just done my job. And I didn't initiate or need to tell these gentlemen anything about what I was doing, except for the fact that they called me in, and I needed to explain where my heart was and why I was doing what I was doing, and that it was in the interest of the thing that they cared about too. I cared about our people. I cared about my fellow Latter-day Saints and surrounding people that were in pain. And so I definitely did get the sense that I was being seen as, well, I actually think on some level, well, two things come up for me. Number one, I've never, and I think this is strange and I can't really explain it myself, but I've never felt intimidated by acting. I've always felt equal to men. That's never been a problem for me, and I don't really know why. But I've sat, and I think that's the irony is, before I went on this faith journey, I've been in many ward and state callings and sat on ward and state councils for years and years and years, and I've always been one of the sisters that I could hold my own easily. I didn't have a problem in speaking, and I think the brethren appreciated that, because they didn't need to coddle me. I think they respected my views and my voice and my opinions. And yet at that point in my development, I also knew, that like my voice wasn't the final voice, and they knew, and I knew that was how it was. Now, I think it became a little different when I used that same skill set to have my own autonomous professional opinion and spiritual opinion. Actually, I tried to sort of talk about professional, like where I stood as a professional, but I also, I tried a lot of various strategies to sort of reach them. And in some, at some point in time, I also would lean into spiritual impressions and experiences that I'd had being called by God to sort of expand my scope and to help as many people as possible. And that this was not just a job, this was a vocation, which is a spiritual calling that happens to be what I do all day, but it's something that's deeply, it's part of who I am and what I am here to do. And I think that was very confusing and off-putting, because in some ways, I think we socialize women in the LDS Church to be very, very submissive and deferential. And I think I was probably showing more healthy masculine energy than they really knew what to do with. And that may have mapped as disrespect to them, which it wasn't disrespect on any level. It's just, it felt uncomfortable to them, because from their perspective, a woman should think, feel, and behave one down, and that to them reads as respect, which isn't respect. I think that's more just poor self-esteem, because the system has oftentimes caused women to not feel equal to men in settings of this nature.
Yeah, they're like, how'd this one get through?
Right. Yeah.
She ain't towing the line.
Right. Well, and we were told, I heard from someone who had spoken with my stake president that, when she said to him, in my defense, and me and Nathan's defense, like, what do you think you're going to accomplish by this, like, sort of, this disciplining them? Because I had made clear that, like, because as an autonomous person doing something that I felt very deeply called to, I wasn't going to I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't going to cease and desist. And they didn't have any power to do that anyways in this day and age. And so when a friend of mine who was the Relief Society president asked the stake president that, he told her that he wanted to humble us. And again, to me, that was heartbreaking a little bit. Yes, that's like, wow, that says a lot. That what he was mapping was pride, when in all of our conversations, both mine and my husband's with these gentlemen, I was so like vulnerable, like to me, leading with my heart, leading with why I was doing what I was doing and how much I loved people and I cared about people and I loved God and I wanted to emulate the gospel of Jesus Christ as I saw it. And to truly mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort, and to be with those on the margins as I saw and I interpreted the mission and message of Jesus Christ. This is who I am. And then to map their interpretation of that as, I guess, prideful, to me just had me sort of realizing that, like, I don't know that there's anything that I could have done that that would have broken through what to me felt like just a lot of fear and a lot of overwhelm in a situation where they were managing or trying to manage something that was far more complicated than they had the skill set to manage. And so sort of to just make us go away. And I think that's kind of, I've thought a lot about this. It's like, okay, I've run out of ideas. I know, I mean, as a parent, right? I think sometimes it's like, especially as a young parent, it's like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I guess you just send them to their room because I'm out of ideas. I don't have anything like effective to do because nothing's working. And I kind of got the feeling that it was like, we can't will them to do anything because they didn't have the language for this, but these two people are so differentiated and so aligned in what they think and feel is right that there is nothing we can do other than this one last little thing. And so they did it. And yet at the same time, we maintained two things. Number one, nothing has changed in terms of our call, other than the fact that we no longer now have them sort of like breathing down our necks. And secondly, I can love them and I can forgive them because I actually understand their fear and I understand why this was so overwhelming and scary for them. And so I really don't even actually have malice or hard feelings about them. It makes me sad that it went down this way. It's made our lives much more complicated relationally in some ways. And so I wish it weren't this way, but I have yet to have one instant of feeling any sort of regret for what we're doing, because I think what God wants of each of us is to discover who we truly are and to live deeply into that. And I feel like that's what Nathan and I are doing.
Well, and by them doing this, it's the Obi-Wan when Darth Vader strikes him down.
Yeah.
It's going to make you stronger and louder. Yeah. And it already has.
Yes.
The things I've heard, all the way out here in the West.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of how this is a black eye on the church. And it's fear. You're right. It's fear. You can easily be mad, but it's fear of the yes man don't know what to do. And yeah, it's masking as a kind of a bully type of situation because they just don't know.
And I can see that. I can see that. And I mean, it speaks into, what they didn't realize in the unfolding of this is at the very time this is unfolding, Nathan and I are really deeply exploring on the podcast, the impact, the psychological impact of men that are strongly socialized in a patriarchy. And it was very ironic that as we are wrestling these final moments, I'm actually witnessing on the ground how men socialized in a patriarchy and really deeply embedded in and committed to their inability to be relational, their inability to collaborate, their inability to have empathy, their inability to be curious. I mean, all of the components that I was studying, I was witnessing. And Nathan and I are trying to embody healthy humanity, which is a composite of masculine and feminine. And we're trying to be both straightforward and candid and directive, which is very healthy masculine, but we're also trying to be collaborative. And we're trying to meet them as equals. We're trying to be oriented around helping our community become strong. And they just couldn't receive it. And so it was very, in some ways, like a tender mercy, to use some of our LDS language, right? The sense that like I was being able to see through a lens that was like, I get what's going on. They don't know how to do the thing that needs to be done right now to soften into listening and curiosity. And they're seizing up in fear, and then they're just exerting this sort of like power over thing, which is again another reason why we didn't show up to the hearing, because it was like I don't really see myself as one down. I don't see myself as one up either. I see us as equal, and therefore I am not going to show up to something where you judge me. Because that's,
and you made the decision already,
right? And so it was just like this isn't working. This isn't working for the way we actually view reality. You are not my judge. And I don't dignify that. And I'm not going to step into a situation where you can exert this over me and potentially, do me any degree of harm, because I have power over myself. I don't give that to you or really to anyone else. This is something that I own, and that I collaborate in who I am with my creators. And so to us, as much as it was, on the one hand, it was, kind of heartbreaking and challenging. On the other hand, no, we were never surprised, in that we knew this was a possibility, and we moved forward anyways, because we take ownership of who we are, and we feel as if we only answer to, ourselves and to our God. And I think when one really comes to that point, it's not to say you don't have bad days, and, there aren't, struggles connected to, the human condition. But as far as like the bigger questions are concerned, no, I don't second guess anything connected to this situation.
If the church is what we're taught that it is, and it's always being pounded, it's the best, it's the greatest, it's the most amazing thing on the planet, it should be able to stand up to absolutely anything. And I've said that for so many years. It's like, what's the fear? Is our testimony of it so fragile that we are not willing to hear a different perspective?
You're preaching to the choir. And that's essentially what we're doing, is we're saying, if any system or any individual that knows of its goodness is willing to hear feedback, and the only humans or systems that can't are really struggling with a lot of shame. And when we feel shame, we can't take feedback, because the feedback feels like a confirmation of our greatest fear, which is, okay, I've been found out. And so when we struggle with shame, or when we have these shadows, we become very, very, sometimes aggressive when dialogue of this nature is engaged in, because it does feel like a mortal threat, which it was never intended to be. It's really more about,
it's on them.
Yeah, we don't need to feel this shame. Nobody. And interestingly, is when these things are addressed, and again, I keep going back to relationships because I'm a relationship counselor. If a human being acknowledges their wounds and is accountable and offers to be curious and listen and evolve, that's very endearing. It actually, paradoxically, it draws one towards you as you grow and are accountable. And that's the sad part, is that were they willing and able to sort of take people like myself in and listen and learn and grow and allow people to evolve and have a creative faith connected to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, their numbers would, they would flourish. They would have people really wanting to stick around because the people that work with me want to be connected in some ways, or they want to find healing because it is a part of their identity. They don't want to go away and be unresolved. Those folks don't come to the Latter-day Struggles podcast. They just go do something else. These are the folks that actually want to find healing and resolution and a peaceful relationship with the church on some level.
And if you can get past the fear of differing opinions, it's a freeing position to learn, to be able to be curious and to learn. And I was raised hard right, conservative my whole life, and feared anything from the left, and wouldn't even talk to somebody that have an opinion from the left. And I was just frustrated and mad all the time and fearful.
Yeah.
And when I stopped doing that, it's amazing how you open your heart and you can just, again, it's freeing.
Yes.
It's a freeing position to be in. So.
No, amen. I couldn't agree more. And that's one of the things we actually work on in the work that I do, which is having compassion on people that believe differently than you. And in this case, oftentimes it's somebody who is in a different stage of faith, a partner, a parent, or something like that. And to allow them to be who they are and where they are. And in often, in many cases, more conservative. That's okay. There's a place for that. What we all just, I think, would benefit from is to acknowledge and respect the otherness of the other and allow a faith community to be a place of growth and mutual support as people are learning and growing, as opposed to the church being a place where everyone must conform or else. That's not a place that is conducive to growth and development of the soul, because those that stick around and feel differently, what they are hearing or learning or taking in is, if you feel, think, or believe differently, you either need to be quiet or go away. And that isn't an environment that is conducive to growth and development and health.
I think that's Satan's plan.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you, Valerie, so much for coming on. This has been enlightening, and appreciate you sharing your story with us. Any final words, or how can people reach you, or what, as we wrap this up?
Yeah. You can find me on the podcast is called Latter-day Struggles, and it's on all of the normal providers. And you can also find me, my website is ValerieHamaker.com or latterdaystruggles.com. They both go to the same place. And I'm probably most active on Instagram at Latter-day Struggles Podcast. So yeah, feel free to check me out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you again for listening to The Parish the Thought Show. We know you have many podcast options and appreciate that you have chosen us. If you love what you hear, please give us a rating on whatever platform you find us. And don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. If you hate what you hear, only tell us. You're still here? Click on the next episode for more from The Parish the Thought Show.